A quick disclaimer before we begin, the PEMF podcast does not contain any medical advice, and the content provided is for informational purposes only. If you have any health concerns, please visit a healthcare professional. Welcome back to another episode of the PEMF podcast.
And in this episode, we're going to go over kind of 10 top tips to look for when buying a PEMF device. Because as we kind of said from the start with this podcast, it's all about kind of helping people get to know about the therapy, learn about how to use the therapy and what they can actually use it for, and to actually what to look for when maybe they are going to buy a device. And it's not necessarily to get a device from us, from Andy's company, NewMed, that he's obviously been selling PEMF devices now for the last 10 years. It's more just for people to listen to make sure they find the right device.
Yeah, so just to enforce what Josh was just saying about finding the right product. So as with any industry, especially the wellness industry, PEMF therapy is becoming more and more widely used, and people are seeing the benefits of that. And unfortunately, a lot of manufacturers are jumping on that wagon and are bringing out products that maybe are a little bit substandard, and really don't want the PEMF industry being ruined by a product that is not up to scratch and is not doing what it should do. So these guides are basically going to give you an insight into what questions you should be asking these manufacturers, and it should be able to weed out the products that are no good.
Okay, so now we're going to go into our top 10 points then. We'll start with intensity. Is there an intensity range that people should be looking for, and what kind of is that?
So yes, looking at the intensity range, I'll try and nominate specific intensities that people should be looking at. But also the problem is a lot of these manufacturers that are selling devices now, they know that it's very difficult for people to test the intensity. Your average person doesn't have an oscilloscope, or they don't have an EMF meter or way in which they can measure the intensity of a device. So I'm going to give some simple tips into ways in which you can test devices. So when you're looking at buying a PEMF device, intensity again, for me, your 1 Gauss, 2 Gauss, up to 10 Gauss systems, they have their benefits. But if I've got the means or the affordability to go for a little bit more intensity, then I would. But that's also a thing to mention, is that do the manufacturers put the intensity on their website? Do they tell you what intensity a device is? Generally, if they don't, that means they're super low intensity, and they may even be lower than the Earth's natural frequency intensities, which we're seeing coming out a lot these days. So the Earth has an intensity of about 0.5 Gauss, which we've mentioned on kind of average across the world. If you're buying a PEMF device that is less than 0.5 Gauss, then, no good. You can just go out in the grass and get the same benefits. So look for something that generally is going up from 20, 30, 40, 50 Gauss in a full body system. And then in a localized system, you're looking for at least about 100 Gauss intensity. That's going to give you a nice treatment range and area to treat the body with a PEMF device. But here's a way in which you can test it. If you've bought a device that is saying it's about 50 Gauss and above, then you can use a magnet. You can use these magnets that you can buy online, or not necessarily a fridge magnet because you want it to be a little bit stronger than that. But if you can find one on eBay, actually NewMed sell a test magnet. It's very cheap. It's just for means of people to test their system. But if you have a PEMF device that is claiming to be 50 Gauss or above, pop one of these little magnets on it and see what happens, and it should move. We've actually bought in some devices that claim to be 400 Gauss, put a magnet on it, it doesn't move. Then we've tested it, and it's not even like 10 Gauss. So you need to also be careful that manufacturers are advertising what they are advertising. And something that they also do is stack the intensities. And this is a really common thing that we're seeing at the moment, which for me is very naughty for the industry to be doing. So what we're talking about stacking is if a device, for example, has 10 coils in it, and in this, they're advertising 50 Gauss. But actually what they're doing is each coil is 5 Gauss, and they're adding all those coils together to get 50 Gauss. That's not the way it works. If you have a coil which is giving 5 Gauss, your system should be advertised as 5 Gauss. That's what you're going to get as a spread across the mat. So again, it's another thing to ask that manufacturer. Are you stacking those intensities? How much intensity is coming from one coil? Ask that question and see what they come back with.
Yeah, no, some really interesting points you brought up there, because a lot of that doesn't kind of get brought up by the PMF manufacturers. As you said, they kind of tend to hide stats on their website, or they just won't put it on their website. So it is something that you should be kind of asking these people before you do go and buy a device. But now kind of moving on to our second point, which is frequency in the programs. What would you say about those?
So the frequencies in programs, again, it's something, it's quite simple when you look at it. You need to find a device that has a range between about 1 to 30 hertz as a minimum. The 1 to 30 hertz is seen as the most natural frequencies. That's a good range of kind of fits within the normal brain frequencies throughout the day. But if you can get a device that has 1 to maybe 100 hertz, then if you want to push it and replicate some of these studies at certain points, some studies use 50 hertz, 60 hertz for different benefits. So again, it's nice to find a device that has like 1 to 100 hertz. Above that, for me, for a PMF device is just not necessary. You don't need to necessarily go up to 1,000 hertz or 2,000 hertz. It just starts becoming those slightly less natural frequencies. So actually the range of 1 to 30 or 1 to 100 is absolutely fine when looking for those. But the big thing with frequencies that I would say to consider, and the programs that the device offers, is try and find a device that takes your circadian rhythm into account. So what I mean by that is find a device that offers higher frequencies in the morning, lower frequencies later in the evening. And that's going to also help your circadian rhythm. So when I talk about the brain frequencies, we talk about alpha, beta, gamma, all these different brain states that your brain is running throughout the day. So we don't necessarily want to apply a device later in the evening at a high frequency, because that's almost could affect our sleep and our circadian rhythm. So devices that offer like hundreds of different programs, again, for me, completely unnecessary. And all it does is just confuse the user. Try and find a device with only a few programs, and that those programs harness a number of different frequencies, so the body doesn't get used to one frequency. The older way of applying PMF therapy is, we still see it today, is that you select one frequency and press go. You can use these effectively because you can use higher frequency in the morning, lower frequency in the evening. The problem with this is people tend to want like a frequency guide. So they kind of say to us, I've got arthritis. What frequency do I need to use? Or I want to help this for sleep. What frequency? And if you've got a device that makes it simple and only has a couple of programs, uses a number of different frequencies, and gives you a guide as to when to use them throughout the day, that's what you need to be asking and looking for.
Okay, great. We'll kind of go on to our third point now, and it's about portability, which is another kind of quite an overlooked aspect of PMF, because a lot of people might buy devices for their parents, and their parents then get them and they have trouble bringing them upstairs or actually laying them out, and just little things like that. So what would you consider when it comes to portability for these devices?
So portability is something that's becoming more and more needed in a PMF device. So the biggest problem we see is that people invest huge amounts of money in a PMF device, and it's the best PMF device you can have. It's got the best frequencies, best intensities, all these sorts of things. They don't use it. And the reason they don't use it is because it's big, it's clunky. You have to plug it into a wall. Just getting it on and off the bed is a real pain. And it sounds stupid, all you got to do is lay a mat out on a bed, come on, and then you jump on it and press go and all that sort of thing. But all the barriers you put in place with the device, if you have to input your frequencies and if you have to set the device up every time you use it, but also that it's heavy, it's hard to unfold, it's hard to store, all these sorts of things, take that into account when buying a PMF device, because you want something that's mobile, or you want something that's lightweight, and you want something that's easy to set up and use. Because if you're going to use it 2-3 times a day, or if you're going to use it just once a day, you want it to be super easy, and you want it to be simple to get on it, press go, and away you go each time. So again, take that into consideration. A lot of people don't take that into consideration when buying a device. Is it portable? Is it easy to use?
Definitely, that is probably one of the most overlooked kind of aspects of PMF, because if you're not using it, obviously you're not going to get the benefits. But we'll go on to our next point. It's another P, polarity. Is there kind of any polarity aspects you'd look for?
So when it comes to polarity, it's a nice to have. It's not essential. Polarities, basically every PMF device will usually have a north side and a south side if the coils are set up correctly inside. And if you want to change the polarity on any device that has that correct setup, you can simply just flip the mat over if you wanted to. Again, when we're talking about the portability and things, if you've got a lightweight device, it'll be easier to flip it over. But saying that, some devices you can actually change the polarity in the settings, which just makes it a little bit more simple and a bit easier, and that we know which side's north, which side's south. The other thing that some devices will offer is alternating polarities, which again, I don't feel like it's completely necessary, but I get the concept behind it. When we look at the cells and the way that PEMF affects the cells, you want to get an equal balanced cell, and you want to get half of it charged positively, half of it charged negatively. And in doing that, a good way of doing that is using an alternating polarity device. So one which can do maybe, for example, a minute of north and a minute of south, and it does that throughout the program. There's no reason as to why you need north specifically, no reason to why you need south specifically, but if you can alternate those polarities, then great, and it makes sense.
If you do want any more kind of info on polarity, we have actually done a whole podcast on that if you want to go check it out. But moving on to our next point is coils and coverage. Is there like a certain amount of coils a device should have? Should there be space in a certain way? What would you say about that?
Yeah, and this is something that's overlooked and is probably one of the most important things within a PMF device. The reason we say this is because PMF therapy from the coil loses its intensity. On average, it's got a half-life of 1 centimeter. So what I mean by that is every centimeter that you move away from that coil, away from that copper, away from the magnetic field, you lose half the intensity. So if you think 10 centimeters away from a coil, that's not a huge amount, 10 centimeters away from a coil, and you've lost half plus half plus half plus half, so you literally are coming down to like very, very, very small intensities by the time you're only 10 centimeters away from that coil. So there are devices that are popping up on the market that are a bit of a PEMF box ticking activity. And what I say by that is they offer like maybe heat or stones or all these sorts of things as like a number of different therapies. And then they just chuck 1 or 2 coils in there and they think, there we go, now we've got PMF. There's a very popular device on the market. I won't name any names, but it has 4 coils running down the center of the mat, and it has all these different therapies that go with it. These systems also, a lot of the intensities of these systems, one of them we actually found was 0.0008 Gauss. I mean, incredible that someone is selling this and calling it a PEMF system. You have 4 coils running down the mat at that intensity. It's a box ticking activity. That's what I call it. They've said, we've got a copper coil in there. We're producing PMFs, which they are. But to such an intensity and such a very bad spread of those coils that it's just doing virtually nothing to anybody. Ask a manufacturer how many coils they have. Ask the manufacturer where the coils are. Important question. And if a manufacturer gets their back up and starts saying, why are you asking these questions? Then probably because it means they don't have many coils and they haven't got them spread out across the mat. If you only have small amount of coils in one location of the mat, then like I say, the further you move away from the coils, you're just going to lose any intensity and it's not going to help anybody. So ask that question. How many coils? Does it have them spread out across the mat? Are you getting a good coverage of the PMF therapy across that system?
Definitely. And kind of talking about talking to manufacturers, would that be something that you'd look for, the country of origin for the device or the manufacturer as well?
Yes, and it's a horrible thing to say because I don't want to nominate certain countries that produce bad systems, but it seems to be happening in the PMF industry. And we're seeing a lot of cheap Chinese-made products coming into the market now for PMF therapy, unfortunately. And that's not to say that China is producing good PMF systems, but the majority of the market that we're seeing is flooded with these PMF devices. And actually, there's one particular manufacturer that just rebrands the same system for many, many, many different companies. And if you look at the system, it looks exactly the same. It's just got a different branding at the top of the mat. these systems are being mass produced in China, and they're not really taking into consideration coil coverage, like we mentioned, intensity, frequencies, all these sorts of things that are real key ingredients with PEMF therapy. All they're trying to do is flush a huge amount of what they call PEMF into the market by very aggressive and actually pretty good marketing. So yes, I would ask where the devices are manufactured. It does influence me when I'm buying a PEMF device because at the moment we're seeing a lot of bad products coming out of certain countries.
And as well, with these same kind of products, a lot of them have big control units that look a bit intimidating and can be a bit scary to use. Is that something you need to kind of counter in the ease of use of the device as well?
Yeah, and again, for people that don't want to invest a huge amount of time looking into PEMF and want to find something simple, then actually it's not a bad thing to do. Simple products, simple PEMF devices are not that bad. Like I said, if they're offering you a range of frequencies at a good intensity and it's easy to use, go for it. There's a device on the market called the MAS, which we used to sell actually, and I think it's a great product. It does a lot of good for people, but if you look at the control unit, it must have nearly 300 buttons, and it's just completely unnecessary for a PEMF device. What they're trying to do is give you the ability to set up all these different frequencies, all these different intensities, all these different programs, all that sort of thing, which just overcomplicates for the user. As I say, great device, and maybe if you want to use it in clinics, it's one to look for. But as an end user product, try and find something that's simple to use.
Yeah, no, definitely. And as well, kind of linking back with the manufacturers as well, is there kind of any certifications these devices should have, depending on maybe where you're located or kind of just in general, really?
Yeah, and it's something that we've struggled with in the past in the UK, selling PEMF devices, because in the UK, we have to have CE certifications, which is a certain certification that proves that the product's been tested to a certain regulation and it's safe to use. Later on, UK are adopting UKCA, but that's not coming just yet. So that's going to be a different thing to talk about. But if you're located within Europe, you want to look for CE certifications. A lot of the devices are sold in the US because that is quite a big market for PEMF therapy. And people tend to import a lot of products from the US. But what they don't ask is what regulatory certificates those devices have. And it's not to say necessarily that the device is bad because it might be regulated in another country. But the problem is when you come to import those products and when you come to use them on other people. So if you're importing a product into the UK, for example, or into Europe without CE mark, you're likely to get problems at customs. A lot of the time they can turn that system around because it doesn't have the right certifications. And also vice versa with the US, I would be looking for FDA. So it is a product registered on the FDA. And again, FDA is the Food and Drug Authorization, and that's about regulating products that move into the US that have been tested correctly. So it's not a biomarker of product that's a bad product, especially if it maybe, for example, it has FDA clearance, but it doesn't have CE because you know that it's gone through the regulatory in the US. But it's more about a product of importing and also getting insurance on those products. So I'll give you an example. If you're bringing a product into a clinic in the UK and it doesn't have CE, you might get it through the doors in your clinic and you might start using it on people. But what you might have a problem with is getting insurance for that product as well. So ask the question, does the product have CE certifications? Does it have FDA listing? Does it have FDA regulations? It's a question you want to be asking those manufacturers.
Definitely. And kind of on the topic of importing devices, is this something people should really be doing, or should they kind of be looking for someone maybe more local to them or just someone within their country that is supplying the PEMF device?
Ideally, it's always recommended to find a local supplier because if you or a local distributor for a certain product, we're seeing a lot of people, like I mentioned, importing product from the US and the UK. And if they have a technical issue with that product, then they're having to ship it all the way back to the US to get it fixed. So yeah, try and find a local supplier if you can. If not, overseas supplier, but one that you know that you can get the product to and fro if you have any problems.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's another thing that people don't look for when they are going to buy these devices, maybe abroad. But now on to our last point, our 10th and final point. what would you class as kind of a quality PMF device as such?
So quality is usually dictated by the price in the PMF industry, unfortunately. So it's the best way in which I can describe it, because PEMF devices aren't cheap to make. When you build a PMF device, a decent PMF device, you have to use a lot of copper to create the intensities, to create the magnetic fields. And like we mentioned earlier, if you're spreading a lot of copper coils across a mat, that takes a lot of copper to do that. So PMF devices aren't cheap to make. So a lot of the time, the product is dictated by its price and the quality is dictated by its price. If you are looking at a PMF device on the market for a full body system for like £500 and converting that to dollars, like $800 and less, for me, I would probably avoid those devices. They just don't scream quality to me. To build a proper PMF device, it needs to be over £1,000 or $1,500 at least to build a quality PMF device. And as long as that product isn't a cheap product that's being marketed and sold under a multi-level marketing campaign and the cost is high, for those reasons, generally a device that is over about $1,500 is going to be more of a quality product. PMF devices can go into the multi thousands, because if you, like I say, if you're getting high intensities in the thousands of range, then you need a lot of copper to create that. So for home users, look at lowest device of about $1,500, but don't go crazy as well. You know, home users don't necessarily need to spend tens of thousands of dollars on a device. But my point here really is just the PMF industry is very much like any other industry. If it seems too good to be true, it usually is. So maybe avoid the very cheap range of PMF devices.
Okay, great. And as I said, that is all of our 10 points, but would you like to just quickly kind of summarize all of these for everyone?
Yeah, so in a quick summary to wrap this section up, you want to be asking your manufacturers these questions. So intensity range, is it 20, 30 Gauss above? When it gets to you, can you put a magnet on it? Does the magnet move? Frequencies, programs offered, make sure your device is looking at your circadian rhythm and it offers a nice range of frequencies, minimum kind of 1 to 30 hertz. Portability, is it lightweight? Is it easy to use? Is it able to move? Can you move it between rooms, beds, seats, all that sort of thing? And you don't have to, you can fold it up easily and you can store it away. Polarities, again, does the device offer alternating polarities, but also can you flip it within the settings? As I said, it's not completely essential. You can flip the mat over, but polarities is something you want to be asking the question for. Coils and coverage, one of my most important points. Does it have multiple coils within the mat? Does it have a good coverage across the mat? Country manufacturer, as I say, ask the question. Just say to them, where are these devices manufactured? It can't hurt anybody to ask that question. Ease of use, is it easy? Does it have only a few programs? Again, does it take your circadian rhythm into account when you're using those programs? You don't want to be spending 10 minutes every day setting up programs. Find one that gives you really simple to use programs. Certificates, ask them the question, does it have a CE certificate? Does it have UKCA? Does it have FDA? Find the one that is regulated in your country and ask those questions. And local support, are you talking to a local supplier? Ask them where they're based. A lot of people actually say we have multiple offices here, and they set up PO boxes and, ask them where they are. Are you in my country? And buy quality. Big thing, spend some money on a PMF device. You are investing in your health. Make it count.
And if you have maybe any other points about PMF devices that you now kind of have questions about, or just kind of PMF as a general, make sure to leave them below this episode, wherever you're listening, and we'll make sure to answer them in our next PMF Talk episode. And obviously, while you're down there, make sure to leave us a follow on whatever platform you're on. And if you're on Spotify, leave us a 5-star review. It just helps us make better episodes every week and obviously get bigger and better guests on.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the PEMF podcast.